sometime down the road, they realize that they've done a physical recovery, but there's some ongoing trauma from that experience. And I'm not sure if I've got a grasp on what happens with trauma when you experience many traumatic events. But do many traumatic events over a lifetime compound and become a big one? Or like what happens when you are traumatized many times and then you're dealing with the trauma of an injury from stroke, for example? And it seems like it's a more overwhelming space for people to deal with trauma if they haven't dealt with their traumas over a lifetime.
This is Recovery After Stroke with Bill Gasiamis, helping you go from where you are to where you'd rather be.
Bill Gasiamis here. This is episode 63 of the Recovery After Stroke podcast. And today I'm speaking with Justin Sunseri from the Polyvagal podcast about trauma, how to recognize it, how to acknowledge it, how to deal with it, and how to move on from it. Justin, welcome to the podcast.
I am super happy to be here. Thank you so much, dude.
And I'm really pleased to have you, man. When I came across your own podcast, the Polyvagal podcast, and we'll go into that in a little bit, I got really excited because you're a therapist, a family therapist, and a marriage therapist. Tell me a little bit about the work that you do.
The title's a little bit misleading. It's licensed marriage and family therapist, but I'm able to work with pretty much anybody. Currently I'm a therapist in a school district. So I work with mostly high schoolers. I've also worked with, little kids. I've done family therapy. I do parenting groups. I've been doing those for the past 11 years or so. I've worked in substance abuse. So the amount of leeway that I have with the degree and with the license is pretty vast. So just the marriage and family therapist doesn't quite capture everything that we're able to do.
Yeah, great.
But right now I'm working in a school district doing therapy with high schoolers.
When I heard some of your episodes, it seems that the theme for a lot of your episodes of the podcast are about trauma. And you start every episode of your podcast talking about the possibility that this episode that you're about to do is going to trigger people. Why is it important to have that conversation at the beginning of your episode? And does that, we'll just leave it at that. Why is it important to have that at the beginning of the episode?
The simple answer is there's I guess a couple different layers here. The simple answer is because I don't want to trigger my audience. I know it's bound to happen. I know that as we talk about trauma, and we keep the podcast very safe, we don't talk about details. It's not necessary. I know that people who have survived a trauma are going to go there anyways. So I don't need to explicitly say those details out loud. So we keep it very general. But I want to do the best I can to educate in a safe way, because I want people to be able to benefit from it and grow from it. So that's the easy, simple answer: is I want this to be a safe experience.
Yeah.
A little bit more complex answer would be that if we can, I don't know if we've gotten this far yet, but if we can approach these things little by little in short segments, it will increase our ability to handle them in greater doses, so that when they do have a flashback, or when they are talking about these things in therapy, that they're coming at it from, hopefully, it's something called a vagal break. Hopefully their vagal break is a little bit strong. We haven't gotten that far, but basically they'll be able to handle it the next time they talk about it a little bit easier. That's kind of the idea. Is this can help someone by having new information.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping by having new information and a nice solid explanation for why they went into a shutdown state, or why they're stuck in a fight mode or a free flight mode, that having a new explanation, that in and of itself can be very relieving. So the next time these things come up, it might be a little bit easier. So that's that means easy answer, but also a little bit more in depth, is that I want to help people build their ability to tolerate these things.
That's beautiful, so that's a lovely way to start a podcast, by the way. And the reason I see it as a great way to start a podcast is because you're doing exactly that. You're giving people the opportunity to learn something new, understand the application of what they learned, and then when it's time for them and they're feeling brave enough, start applying it to their own experience of trauma, and then have little baby chunks of achievements, things that they get through that allows them to get eventually to that higher level challenge that's causing them the drama in their life.
Yep. Learning these things can just by themselves can be so illuminating and so normalizing and reduce the amount of fear and blame and self-judgment. And that alone is a huge relief because it's like you've lived through the trauma still lives within you. People are having nightmares about it. They're having flashbacks during the day. So that's already there. Plus they have all this like self-judgment and blame and shame and, I should have done this, I should have done that. If we can at least bring a new level of education and alleviate those thoughts of it was my fault sort of stuff, if we can at least alleviate that, just by learning new information, that can be very healing. I get messages from people saying, like, this, just hearing this was a big deal for me.
Yeah, it's a big deal because now they're starting to learn what they didn't know they needed to know, and having that awareness is just a brilliant thing. Because imagine the first time you're going through life, the majority of your life, experiencing something, and then you learn something you didn't know you needed to know to help in the healing. And that is often, I see with the people that I coach and the people that I speak to about stroke, I see that first thing then starts to expand and become this next thing, and the curiosity takes over. And it's like, well, if that was good for me and I realize that now, what's the next thing that I need to find?
That's exactly it. Is you tell someone who's survived a trauma and is kind of, really stuck in a very raw place, well, just do some meditation. For them, it's like, no, we're not quite there yet. My level of safety, my level of ability to tolerate what's going on inside of me is not even close to being able to close my eyes and sit still. But I'll listen to a new piece of information in doses at a time. I'll do that. And that's exactly it, is that, so I can tolerate that. I'm a little bit curious about the next episode. And I've noticed something that I have noticed with my podcast, looking at my stats, because I'm kind of stats obsessed. From the first episode, where there's a drop off. From the first episode to the second episode, there's a drop off. And maybe it's because the podcast is horrible. I don't think it's what it is.
It's great.
But I've heard from people saying, I've listened to the first one like 3 times, and I'm not ready to get to the next one. That's totally fine. There's no rush. There's plenty of time, and it'll be there forever. But I've heard that from people that tell me that I'm not quite ready to get to the next one. And I see that in the stats, that there is a drop off. And then once people get to episode 2, it's pretty much, it stays, like the stats sort of stay pretty much flat. As far as people aren't dropping off, as far as listenership. But if we can get a little bit of curiosity going, I think it's like a snowball effect. And that, eventually they may be open to therapy or meditation or yoga or whatever that looks like for them as far as their healing process.
If you've had a stroke and are in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind, like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously because you've never had a stroke before, you probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
Can you give me some kind of a explanation about what trauma is? It doesn't have to be a dictionary definition, but what you feel trauma is.
We have to trauma. We have to go a little bit deeper, but the basic idea is that there's a couple different paths to trauma, and one of them is a chronic disruption of connectedness. And I forgot who said that. It was probably Dr. Porges. Chronic disruption of connectedness, which means that your connection with a safe adult, especially in pretty much in childhood, it was chronically disrupted. That might be through abuse or abandonment or neglect, but that you were not able to have a safe and solid relationship with a safe adult. So that was a chronic issue, and that leaves you in this state of flight, potentially from abuse, usually from like abuse, emotional abuse, or in a fight state, or in a completely shut down, alone, withdrawn state. And it's no fault of the victim. It's that they didn't have the safe caregiver to build a healthy attachment with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one path to trauma. The other path to trauma that I would label is surviving at least one acute, intensive episode where you were sympathetically charged, like you wanted to run away, you wanted to fight, but you weren't able to do so. And that might be because somebody immobilized you or something. To me, trauma is usually from another human being. Like if a tiger attacks you, you don't. Actually, I guess you could be traumatized. Yeah, you'd be traumatized. But yeah, no, that's right. But I always think about it from human to human though. But the shame is not there. But I guess that was my point, is that when you survive a car crash, there's no shame. You could be traumatized, but shame is always connected to human beings, I think. But anyhow, so the second path to trauma, I would say, is that you've survived a thing. Like you wanted to mobilize, you wanted to get out of the situation, but you were stopped from doing so. And so your body went into this freeze state where you're highly charged, like your motor's running, but you can't escape. So you're kind of like shutting, like it's like you're hitting the brake and the gas at the same time in a car. And it can, the day-to-day experience might be something like panic, where if someone's had a panic attack, they're extremely charged up. Their thoughts are running wild, heartbeats going, but then they freeze up. And I think it's like more of a day-to-day sort of experience of freeze. So I think it's two paths to trauma, which is a chronic disruption of connectedness or surviving at least one of these extremely intensive episodes where you cannot escape, even though your body is ready to escape or fight somebody off.
On your website, there's a statement that says that trauma has been a constant underlying factor with nearly everyone I've worked with since 2008. And therefore, those people who are traumatized, are they having trouble in life, generally speaking, and are struggling to have strategies to get through life because this underlying trauma is rearing its ugly head?
Yes. The only thing I would, the caveat here, when we say that they're having trouble with strategies, they're not even in a place to strategize. So when you're traumatized, one of the things that gets compromised is your ability to think clearly, make a plan. You're always kind of in this like flight, fight, or shutdown state. And biologically speaking, when we go into those states, we really compromise our ability to think clearly and to be able to problem solve and to be able to cooperate with other people, to, you know what I mean? Like those skills, those cognitive, higher functioning kind of skills, they get lost or compromised. So it's not just a matter of I can't strategize or I can't cope. It's like my body is not in a place to be able to learn a new coping skill or to apply it effectively. I'm always in this defensive state where my body thinks that I need to run away or fight or hide or be invisible. So it's, yeah, absolutely. The kids that I've worked with, the adults I've worked with, the parents I've worked with, they're carrying stuff from their childhood. Like the adults I've worked with in parenting groups, the way they parent and the things that they're doing that they want to change, like yelling or being abusive or whatever, is directly connected to, it always is connected to the way that they were raised by their parents. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they realize how traumatizing those things were. And I think we as adults, we laugh those things off. Like, man, my mom or my dad hit me or whatever like that, and we laugh it off. But that sticks with us. That affects the way that we parent. It leaves us in the state of being more aggressive or being more anxious. Like it affects us, yeah, absolutely, day to day. In the kids I've worked with that use drugs, they're in some sort of traumatized state day in, day out, and they're attempting to get relief from that, to regulate their defensive state, even though they're not capable of it, just by thinking their way through it. but maybe a drug might be able to help them out and help alleviate what they're going through. So yeah, it's absolutely underlies the kids I work with that don't go to school or have lost motivation. It's not just because there's always something underneath that. Absolutely.
So they're trying to change their state because the state that they're experiencing regularly is unproductive. It doesn't help them. It makes them feel unwell. It makes them act out. It makes them not be able to connect to people. And I imagine that it makes their life just seriously difficult as far as being able to move through life and attend and turn up to the things that people need to turn up to on a regular basis to consider themselves to have a successful life, not based around stuff or cars or anything like that, but just generally being able to
basic
turn up.
Functioning.
Yeah.
Basic functioning. When you don't have a safe attachment to a parent, or you feel like that a parent, even though they might be in your life, but they emotionally are not connected to you, that's going to affect your daily life. To be so alone, to not have the basics of a safe connection with an adult for a kid that's crippling. Why would I go to school? What does this even matter? And I don't think they're cognitively thinking out oh, this doesn't matter anymore, I'm not going to go. But if you don't have the basic building blocks of life, just a basic, safe, healthy attachment, nothing else matters. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so their motivation level is not just it's like they're in this shutdown state where they've lost the motivation is just gone. Seeing the importance of their own future and the value of school, or the value of challenging themselves to do better, all this stuff is just gone. It doesn't matter anymore. They don't have that fundamental piece that we build on. That we have we have to start with a safe adult, a parent, and then build on that from there. If we don't have that, it really throws everything else off.
Yeah.
That's that's the template for friendships. That's the template for relationships. And if your parents have abused you or abandoned you, that's your template. Sadly, not that I think untreated or ignored or stuffed down, it can definitely be chronic, and I don't want to say permanent because I don't like that, but definitely be chronic. But it doesn't have to be permanent, I don't think.
Yep.
And I've seen the people I work with get a lot of relief from that and be able to have healthy relationships and friendships and do better in school. So it's not a life sentence, I don't think.
Yeah, I think all this
It doesn't
stuff
have to be.
Yeah, I think it's some of the old patterns can be unlearned and new patterns can be learnt, and it's a process. And I imagine that people can go through a number of years of learning what they need to know so that they can deal with trauma, leave it in the past where it belongs, and then move on. But with regards to leaving trauma in the past, how is it that people deal with it? Is it that they leave it in the past, or is it that they've dealt with it somehow? What happens when people can move forward from the trauma?
Well, I don't want to pick at your language here, but the way we word things is really interesting.
Please,
and there's nothing wrong with what you're saying,
please,
at all, because that's just no, for real. That's the common language that we use, let it go, leave it behind.
Yeah.
But for someone who's in a traumatized state, it's they don't choose to. First off, of course, they don't choose to carry their stuff with them. But it's not that the issue is that their body is stuck in a defensive state. So the thing they survived is fresh within them. It's still alive with them in them in a way. They easily go back to that scary place, or that time, or that memory, or whatever it was. Even when they dream, when they're asleep, they can't escape it. So it's not a matter of just unlearning something or leaving something behind. It's not a choice. Exactly, it's not a choice. And if it was, they would choose to stop, living through this.
Experiencing that,
yeah, of course. So it's definitely not a matter of learning something new or letting something go. It's a matter of going from the defensive state that you're stuck in and moving up into and I say up because of the way that we're built. Just the biology, the circuitry for being shut down is down in your gut. The circuitry for being mobilized is in your chest, and the circuitry for being safe and social and having healthy relationships and connection is face to heart area.
Okay.
So that's why I say up. And so when you're stuck in a traumatic state, that means you're in flight or fight, which is you're stuck. Your heartbeat's going all the time. If you're stuck in a shutdown state, you're gonna like the issue is you're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And you're going to feel depressed. You're going to feel numb. You're going to feel this like pit in your stomach. So the issue is not leaving things behind. It's allowing. What happens is Peter Levine is really good for this. Is allowing that stuck trauma energy to work its way through your body, and it's much more difficult than I know than me just saying that.
Yeah, that's
but
okay.
but it's letting that energy come through, and that might be through therapy or yoga or meditation or whatever. But working your way up back into your safe and social system, and that's really the alleviation of trauma is to be able to let the energy go, let the stuck energy work its way through your system, and then to be able to come back into a safe and social state. People that are traumatized have a really hard. They have a hard. I hate to say they have a hard time with it because it's like they're choosing it, but being able to tolerate things like eye contact, it's a very scary experience.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to hold eye contact is kind of important for social engagement.
Mm-hmm.
But so if they have trusting someone can be difficult. People in a defensive state are going to interpret the world as scary. They're going to interpret the world as being aggressive or something to run away from. So that it's not because they're defective, it's because they're stuck.
Yep.
They're stuck in a defensive state. So it's not like they're doing something wrong. It's just that their body is stuck in a defensive state.
Now, when you say their body is stuck in a defensive state, is that stuckness occurring in the autonomic nervous system?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's not I'm glad you said autonomic because it's not a choice. The autonomic nervous system is something that happens without our conscious awareness. It just happens.
Yeah.
So being in a defensive state like fight or flight or freeze or shutdown, being in one of these states is absolutely not a choice. It's autonomic, which means you survived something or survived like an abusive home. And the way you survived was by being in more of a flight mode or being in fight mode or being in shutdown. So you're stuck. Your autonomic nervous system was either conditioned to stay there or you had to drop there and stay there to survive and get your needs met, or you survive some sort of acute incident. And I hate to call it an incident, but it's autonomic. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. That's better. Yeah. But it's an autonomic thing. You don't choose to go into fight or shut down. You just do. Yeah. And you do it in that sequence as well, which I think is really important, is that ideally we're in a safe and social state. Like you and I can make eye contact, even though it's a computer, like we're in a good place, right? But if we were in a situation where we were being attacked, we would drop down into flight mode. We would get sympathetically aroused, our heartbeat would increase, adrenaline would start going, we'd go into flight mode, we want to run away. But we can't run away. If we get cornered, then we drop down into fight mode and we would become more aggressive. We would use our arms, fists, we'd fight. But if that didn't work, or if we were held down or pinned down, or if we perceived that we were being overpowered and had no chance, we would just collapse. We would just drop down into being a shutdown. But if we're held down while we're sympathetically active, that's called freeze. So we have the sympathetic energy plus we're being immobilized. That's called freeze. But it's autonomic. We don't choose these things. We don't choose to run away. We just do. All of us. That's the sequence of events that we do. And that looks a little bit different for each person because one person may be able to tolerate more sympathetic arousal. One person may drop down into shutdown faster than someone else based on their own history and upbringing and cultures and all kinds of stuff. But that's the sequence of events that we go through is flight and then fight and then shutdown.
Okay.
And it is autonomic. We get stuck there.
Can I just, for the people listening who might be curious about what the autonomic nervous system is, according to, as far as I understand, the autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that operates our eyes moving, our heart, it operates our lungs, it operates the need to go to the toilet, etc. So it's those things that occur that we don't have to think about doing. They just occur because the autonomic nervous system is what's managing those processes. Let's talk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And breathing too. I mean, all those things that we don't have to think about, it just happens. And all of those things change when we have to defend ourselves. Our breathing automatically changes. It becomes more fast paced, or we become more stiff, like our muscles tense up. All these things just happen without our conscious awareness.
Yeah. So we've spoken a couple of times about sympathetic nervous system, and we haven't spoken about the parasympathetic nervous system, but what is the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system?
The sympathetic is when the motor gets going, is when your heart starts pounding and you run or fight. Or you run first, and if you can't run, then you fight. That's called the sympathetic system, basically where your motor's going, and you have to be more mobile. That's the sympathetic nervous system, or sympathetic autonomic nervous system. The parasympathetic autonomic nervous system is it's actually a couple things. So ideally, it's when you're resting and you're relaxed and you can meditate if you want to. That's ideally where we see that. But it's also this very, very old, evolutionary old system where we shut down completely. And this is fantastic for animals in the wild that are playing dead, because a predator, you stand a better chance of living if a predator will ignore a corpse. And predators they likely might ignore a corpse and prefer a fresh kill. So they will keep running after the herd while you lay down and quote unquote play dead. Or if a predator, but if a predator tackles you and you go limp and that predator brings you back to its cave, there might be a moment in there where you can escape. So if you stay in the shutdown state, not that you're choosing to, but if the body stays in the shutdown state, it's not like it's still present enough to look for that opportunity to escape. So while the predator is carrying you back to its cave to feed its cubs or whatever, another predator might come along and challenge it for the victim, for the prey. Sorry. And while it's being challenged, the prey might spring up, like pop up out of the shutdown state, and use its sympathetic arousal to then run away. So that's the sympathetic is flight fight. Parasympathetic is the shutdown defensive state, but parasympathetic is also just the social engagement system.
Yeah. Awesome. The reason I contacted you for this episode was because in the stroke community, people experience a stroke and then go through a process of healing the brain and attempting to heal the body and get back to walking, etc. And often what happens is sometime down the road, they realize that they've done a physical recovery, but there's some ongoing trauma from that experience. And I'm not sure if I've got a grasp on what happens with trauma when you experience many traumatic events. But do many traumatic events over a lifetime compound and become a big one? Or like what happens when you are traumatized many times and then you're dealing with the trauma of an injury from stroke, for example? And it seems like it's a more overwhelming space for people to deal with trauma if they haven't dealt with their traumas over a lifetime. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I don't know if I have a great answer for you, but I do think it compounds. I'm trying to think just based on my experience working with the people I've worked with. I think there can be levels of trauma, and that could be, it's not uncommon for me to work with someone who has experienced like abuse in the home from a parent, but then also experienced the death of the one person that they could trust, like a grandparent usually. Mm-hmm. And so there's levels of, we can deal with the sudden death or even not just sudden, but we can deal with the trauma of losing the one person in your life that you're connected to. But that doesn't address the trauma of a lifetime of abuse, really, mm-hmm. or abandonment or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there could be levels of trauma that kind of compound upon each other. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a super in-depth answer, but I think I would say, I think that, I don't know, I don't quite have that all mapped out.
Yeah.
But I would say, I do think that, I don't have much more of an in-depth answer for you about that one. But, like if someone who has some sort of trauma that they've experienced, and then they're confronted with a new experience that might be challenging, their body may be more primed to go back to a certain state that they were in. Like their body is kind of stuck in a flight fight sort of state. When they're confronted with a challenging scenario, they're going to drop down into that flight fight state probably a lot faster than someone who has not survived any sort of trauma.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So
okay,
when we're dealing with being stuck in a sympathetically charged situation in the body, how do we begin to become unstuck from that sympathetic space?
I wish I had a really easy answer. I have an easy answer, but it's not easy to do. And the easy answer is that the energy has to be used. But the difficult part of that is that you don't just move around and it goes away. Meaning, like, I think movement can be important. Like if someone who's in more of like a fight mode, I think boxing can be fantastic for them. But mindless boxing where you're just hitting stuff is not going to be helpful.
Right.
But so the issue is attaching mindfulness to your bodily experiences and sensations. And the challenge there is that if you survive trauma and you're stuck in some sort of defensive state, being aware of that and bringing in mindfulness to your body sensations is a terrifying experience. We're very comfortable staying up here in our thoughts, even if the thoughts are uncomfortable and full of blame, shame, and whatnot.
Yeah.
We can do that. But when we're asked to look down and to notice, not only to notice, but to notice and to hold on to and experience what is happening inside of us, it's a very terrifying experience. And that's, I think, a big reason why people stay stuck in trauma, is because it is absolutely terrifying to look inward and to notice what's there. So, but that is the key, is to bring mindfulness to what's happening inside of you. And then while you're doing, I mean, really, in my opinion, it can be darn near anything. And I think it's possible to, actually, I know it is, and Peter Levine says so in his books, that it's possible to release little doses of traumatic energy at a time. And he said that was I was reading one of his in a book called In an Unspoken Voice, and he kind of laid out that the key may not necessarily be to release it all at once, but it may be to little bits at a time to release this traumatic energy through safe experiences while being mindful. So you can do that, I think, if you're boxing or if you're doing, meditation, as long as you can bring, it doesn't have to be those, it could be really like anything. I with the kids I work with, or the teenagers I work with, we use fidgets in session. There's like toys, it's just toys. But there's one in particular it's this like rubbery oval thing, and it has these like rubber spiky things all around it. So it's like this tactile sensation kind of thing, but it's pretty much unbreakable. And when kids are in a state of being more like fight mode, I'll give that to them and I'll say, here, play with this. And it's interesting to see how each kid plays with it, because it's always different. But for me personally, if I'm a little bit more sympathetically charged, I like to pull on it. I like to pull on it and like really use my chest muscles, my arm muscles to like try and break it. And just doing that doesn't do a whole lot. But when you bring mindfulness to it, and you really notice, how does it feel in my fingers? How does it feel in my biceps? How does it feel in my chest? And to really like notice it and experience it, and to allow the body to go through what it's going to go through. If you do that in little bits, that can be a safe way to kind of relearn about your own body sensations, your own body, to bring mindfulness to it, to learn about yourself, and to bring yourself a lot of, I think, love and respect, and to really treat yourself like a friend in a way, and listen to what's happening inside of you rather than covering it up, ignoring it, stuffing it down. So I think that's kind of the key, is to bring mindfulness to these experiences. And it could be literally like, just what does it feel like to breathe deeply? What does it feel like to breathe and to really extend the exhale in a very slow, way, and to really notice, like, how does that feel? And to not just notice it, but like to experience it and let your body experience it without judgment. So mindfulness plus what your body's going through without judgment, I think, is kind of a big part of this.
Yeah, and it sounds like without judgment and without putting a meaning to it. So if you're in a safe space and you're experiencing, you've allowed yourself to experience this trauma, and you're becoming aware of how your body's responding and reacting, but you're in a safe space and you can not put a label on it at that moment, then it'll be really a good place to observe what just happened, so that you're aware of what's occurring. Does that sound right?
I think so. Judgments are an obstacle to healing. Or I don't like saying healing, to becoming unstuck. It's an obstacle because you're not broken, you're not There's nothing to heal. It's an issue of becoming unstuck. So yeah, those judgments, the self-blame and all the shame, that these are obstacles to becoming unstuck. And I know it's not as easy as just turning it off. Like it's not a light switch. But the more that you can come from a place of genuine curiosity, like I really want to know how I'm feeling, and I really want to experience what's happening inside of me versus what's wrong with me, and why am I feeling like this?
Wow.
And okay, now I'll try meditation. Like, wait, hold up. It really has to come from a place of like genuinely being curious. Just like if a friend was like a really close, trusted friend, if they were having some sort of issue and they wanted to talk to you, you wouldn't come at that with like, why are you feeling like this, and what's wrong with you, and why didn't you react this way, and you should have done this or that. You would approach them with, I care about you, and I'm seriously, genuinely concerned about you, and I really want to be here for you. So it's the same thing as to bring that level of love and curiosity to yourself and what you're going through and your bodily experiences and sensations and whatnot.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I remember in my early 20s, I did a fair amount of therapy with a psychologist, and I had some challenges that were just related to things that weren't so serious, but enough that they were interfering with me being fully active in my lifestyle, in my life. And it was, and the challenges that I'd experienced were interfering with my work, the people around me. And I definitely was, looking back now, in a fight or flight state, but not one that anyone would notice and say, well, this guy's been traumatized. So I didn't know what it was. And certainly people around me didn't know what it was. They just thought I was an angry kid, an angry guy.
Yeah.
And I remember going to therapy and bitching and moaning for the majority of it at the beginning, but then later saying, why does my body feel this way? Or why do I act this way? Or why do I react this way? And then once I understood why I was doing it, I would ask my therapist, why would a person say something like that? Not that she had the answer, but she was able to explain that we're all different and we'll come from different spaces. And she made it so that it wasn't a personal response to me. She made it so that that person wasn't actually personally attacking me. They were just expressing something, and maybe they didn't have the skills to express it appropriately. And I didn't need to get upset by it. And I shouldn't have taken it personally. That helped me quite a lot. It made me more curious about why people behave in certain ways, and eventually ends up me contacting somebody like you to ask questions like these.
Yeah.
So,
well, let me make sure I understand. So you were in more of a flight state, and someone would say something to you, and you would interpret it in more of a negative way, right? Not that you chose to.
No.
Not that you chose to.
No.
But it just happens. Like, and that's I think I'm glad you brought that up, because when we drop down to these defensive states, it changes the way that we perceive the world.
Yeah.
And if we're in a fight state, if we're in a fight mode, we interpret our world as more aggressive.
Yeah.
And think about the person that gets the wrong, I don't know, hamburger at McDonald's, they flip out. This is a person who's not in their safe and social state. They're in some sort of fight mode for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And they experience that as a personal insult. You have insulted me by, like, what's wrong with you? You're an idiot. Like, they, call names and whatnot.
Yep.
And they yell and they whatever, make a mess maybe. But this is not someone who's able to rationalize and think clearly and say, oh, you're having a bad day, or like, it's not a big deal, whatever. Like, I can wait 2 more minutes for a new hamburger. So they're not in that place to be able to use those rationalizations. They're in a place of where they experience the world as threatening, or they experience the world as a danger.
Yep.
And so that's where they're coming from, and they behaviorally react that way as well. The other thing that I love that you said, is that kind of what you were saying? That's you were in that place. Okay.
Almost identical. So no matter who I interacted with, they were the problem, and I had real problems interacting with people. And after many sessions and months and even years, it got to the point where I was rational enough and I was able to understand enough when my therapist said, is there a chance that all the things that you're experiencing were because of you and not because everybody else was mad or crazy or rude or attacking? So that's what the end result was.
And she's not wrong, but then you have to ask, well, okay, but why? That's it. I think it's okay to ask why. Yeah. It's okay to ask, like, oh, well, if it is me, well, why? Where does this thought pattern come from? It's not like you're choosing to.
No.
Why am I in this sort of defensive state?
Yeah.
And that'll probably connect to something from your past.
Yeah.
But the other thing that you said that I thought was really important was that nobody would be able to tell. Right?
Wow.
when we talk about these defensive states, we talk about them as if they're this one-dimensional, very cartoony version, like someone who's ready to fight and box, and like that's not necessarily reality. The reality is that people exist, let's in some sort of gradient. So like you may be more safe and social one day, but there might be 40% of you that's in this like flight mode, and you might feel that as like a little bit of anxiety, and that's kind of what anxiety is that your body kind of wants to run away, and that can intensify and whatnot. Or if you know, like sitting in, like I get bored out of my mind in meetings, and I'll like play with a ball. So like my body is mobilized. I'm not really in a safe and social state, but I'm also not like running out of the room. So there's like a percentage or a ratio or you know what I mean? Nobody would know, but I know like in my body that I want to get out of here. Really, I want to get out of here. I'm bored out of my mind.
Yeah.
But I'm also not in the place to like socially engage and whatnot. So I'm just fidgeting. Like when you fidget with stuff, you're kind of more mobilized, which means you're a little bit down the polyvagal ladder, we call it. You're a little bit down into your defensive state of wanting to run away. But you're not really running away. You're not in that cartoony version where you're getting up and running away.
Yeah, I understand. With regards to what you said about movement, that reminded me of something that I've seen previously in animals in the wild. With an animal who's being chased down by the lion, the gazelle, for example, being chased down by the lion, gets away from the lion, and from time to time you see in the documentaries, that I watch on TV about animals, the gazelle will do this really intense shake at the end of the chase. So is that type of movement creating that release from this trauma that it may have experienced? And is the movement that you're talking about helping to mimic this type of release, or you aware of that?
The way it's supposed to happen, and we are animals, like we're mammals, just like the gazelle. The way it's supposed to happen is that if we're in a situation where we have to run away, that we get sympathetically active. The point of the sympathetic activation is to release the activation in a burst of running. And then when we get to safety, we come back to a baseline. So that's why sympathetic activation, being in flight and fight, is not supposed to be chronic. It's supposed to be short term. But what happens with people who are abused or grow up in homes where they're abused, that they become chronically in these states of flight and fight, and that's not what they're for. So that causes all these sort of health issues down the line, or potentially could, as well as relationship issues and all kinds of stuff. So these activations are supposed to be short term. Even when you go into full shutdown and you collapse, that's supposed to be short term. When things are safe, you pop up out of it, and that's where you see more of the shaking. There's a polar bear video online that Peter Levine has, where the polar bear is running away from a helicopter chasing it.
Yes.
Basically, that's what's happening.
Yeah, I've seen
And
it.
they tranquilize it while it's running away. So it's very sympathetically active. It's running away and it can't run away. And so what you'll see it doing is using its teeth to signal like back off. So it's actually in its like fight state while running away. So, but it's giving these signals of like back off. But then while it's sympathetically activated, it gets immobilized because it's shot with a tranquilizer. So as it goes under into its forced shutdown state, it still has all that sympathetic arousal inside of it. So it's still primed to run or fight, but now it's shut down. So it's stuck. And in the video, as it comes out of the shutdown state, basically as the tranquilizer wears off and it comes out of the shutdown state, it starts to shake and tremble and its breathing becomes really spontaneous. And it's kind of like it's releasing the sympathetic energy and coming back up to a baseline. But animals do that no problem. But they don't have, like, human beings don't. And human beings, when we get into a shutdown state, or if we get into when we feel those feelings of wanting to shake things off, it's called crying, by the way. When we cry, we convulse, our breathing is spontaneous, it starts from our gut, we spasm, our muscles tighten. We do all these things that are out of our control. But when we feel when we feel a need to cry come on, which is the need to shake, in just very simple terms.
Yes.
When we feel that come on, we stop it and we say, be strong.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Especially men, right? We say, actually, not, I won't even say that, because the kids I work with, no matter what gender they are, I think it's more of a cultural thing, the belief to like be strong, get over it, leave it in the past.
Yeah.
We say these things to ourselves, and so it keeps the energy. It doesn't allow us to shake off the energy through crying
Wow.
in a healthy way. And that's really what I think crying is about. And when you cry, when you successfully cry, you feel better. You
Mm.
feel lighter. You feel like I've let something off my shoulders, like there's something that's shifted, and you're able to connect with people and whatnot. And especially think about like crying. I think there's certain crying that you do like when you're alone that you're crying, but it doesn't seem to help. And I hear that a lot from people is that when I cry, it doesn't help. But it's like this sort of unsafe crying. It's crying full of judgment. There's all these thoughts going through your head about how weak you are or how you should get
Uh-huh.
over things. And so it's not a safe crying experience. But when you go to like a funeral and people are crying together,
Mm.
it's more of a safe crying experience. And it's really more of a cathartic, sort of like you're letting that grief and that sympathetic energy out from the person, that passed away, because that brings all this stuff along with it. But that's a different type of crying. It's a safe crying and you're with people. And so it actually does seem to help, at least for a little bit in that moment, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't solve the problem of the grief, but it helps.
Yeah, it helps.
But that's the difference.
Yeah, it helps you at that moment. And I
Yeah,
recall experiencing the loss of loved ones and then crying on a number of times in a number of situations after that person's passed. And every time the crying did feel like it released something, and every time it was okay because it was about the passing of somebody. And I have experienced people who experience stroke will often wake up with unregulated emotions. And part of
yeah,
what seems to happen for people after stroke is they cry a lot. And I was one of those people. And I did get a lot of uncomfortable responses from people who were around me at the time saying, you shouldn't cry. Why are you crying, man?
Oh, there you
Everything's
go.
all right.
There you
Don't
go.
worry about it.
So it's not a safe experience then. Crying for you
Mm.
or anyone in that situation may not be a safe experience. If you're being judged for this natural process that your body needs to go through,
Mm.
um, that's not exactly helpful. But your body knows what's up. Your body knows what it needs.
Yeah.
But then it has other people judging it, and then if you take those beliefs on that, I am weak or I shouldn't be doing this, I should get over it. All you're doing is solidifying the fact all that that energy within you, that grief sort of shut down sort of energy.
Yeah. Many years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, I went and did a training, and it was the first time I read about or understood about the work of Stephen Porges was through a friend of mine who was a gentleman called Grant Susulu, who wrote a book called Multiple Brain Integration Techniques, together with a gentleman called Marvin Oka. And one of the trainings, we're learning to understand the intelligence of the head, the heart, and the gut, and how those things can be tapped into to understand emotions better, for lack of a better way to,
Yeah,
or enough time to give you the complete detail of it. So in this experience, at the training, he spoke about the polyvagal theory, and then one of the exercises that we did was the shaking exercise. And he asked us to relive a traumatic experience that was as close to a 2 out of 10 on the scale of dramatic,
okay, yeah,
right? So I went
yeah,
through this process where I just put myself as a child back into a space where I was getting attacked by my brother, just standard brotherly
yeah,
love kind of stuff. And I remember reliving that experience. And then part of the exercise was, while you're reliving that experience, start shaking and do the shake from the bottom of the toes all the way up through the body, out through the fingers, and up into the head, and continue to do that. And I remember doing that, getting to a point where I was in tears after having felt like exactly what you just said, had a safe cry in a safe environment about this
yeah,
situation that I never ever thought would have been
yeah,
traumatic, but it seemed to do something deeper, and it seemed
yeah,
to release something far greater than I ever could have in my head worked out.
yeah,
And that makes me feel like I have a better relationship with my brother because of that.
sure, yeah. You've released some sort of stuck energy, which is going to change the way you think about your brother, right?
Yeah.
If you're not carrying that around exactly anymore. But I think the key here is, I think the shaking is helpful, but you're also in an environment where you're encouraged
Yes.
to be mindful. You're encouraged to feel what you feel.
Yeah.
You're around other safe people. Like there's a whole package that comes with that. It's not
Right.
just that you're shaking.
Yeah.
It's that you have permission to. It's in the culture of that room. It's acceptable.
Mm.
It's encouraged. It's a good thing.
Mm.
So the whole package, I think, sounds like it was really ideal. So if people listen to this and just go home and shake, I don't know how helpful that is.
Yeah.
I know there's like a shaking movement that, but I don't know too much about that.
Yeah.
But I think the key is being mindful, and I don't think you have to recall a specific traumatic event. I don't. If you're ready for that, go ahead.
Yeah.
But if you're just more curious about where you're at, and
Mm.
I would start with just noticing what's happening. What are you feeling, and where are you feeling it?
Yeah.
And really, just from a place of curiosity,
Yeah.
start with like a benign area. Like, how do your toes feel? Like literally, just how do your toes feel? And when you move your toes, how does that feel? How does that affect your breathing? How does that affect your calves? How does it affect, just be genuinely curious
Mm.
and start from there. And then if you feel something, be curious about that. Just notice it. Um, I think it's a safe way. But if you, I'm really worried about telling people who have experienced trauma and are stuck in some sort of traumatic state, go home and shake and think about a trauma.
Oh,
Like,
I agree.
no,
I agree. I
okay.
wouldn't encourage it either. Absolutely.
It's a whole, like, it's a package. Like you were in the right
Yeah.
place with the right
Yeah.
people and the right, like it was the whole package was there.
Yeah. That's important that you said that. I wouldn't have said that. But it's important that you said that
Yeah.
to give people the context of how it happened, when it happened, and why I got a result. And you're right. I don't shake at home on my own. Like, I've never done that before. But this
Yeah.
was an interesting experience, and it was brought forward to us. It was suggested to us as part of what we saw with the video from the polar bear and what we were learning about Stephen
Oh, okay.
Porges' work. So you're right. It was the complete package of education
Package, yeah.
plus experience and then support afterwards. So
Yeah.
that's exactly how I would prefer people to go about it. Absolutely. So now, as we come into the end of the podcast, I just wanted to get a little bit of an understanding about what your Polyvagal podcast is about. And I ask you that because I think the work of Stephen Porges is really important. It's very difficult to explain. And I think it's important that people who are experiencing trauma in any aspect of their life, especially after stroke, understand some of it and understand how they could apply some of the work of Stephen Porges. So I'm just curious about your podcast and what it's about and the things that you discuss.
The podcast is, the first 9 episodes are me talking about the polyvagal theory, and in very simple, very safe terms, no details, no trauma stories, nothing like that whatsoever. Just very easy to understand concepts about flight, fight, freeze, shutdown. Talk about shame, talk about generational trauma. So there's some difficult things, but I think I handle it in a very respectful, safe way. That's like 9 episodes worth of just pure information. I share a lot of like therapy examples or examples of the school system. And then I brought on a co-host. So now she and I are hosting together. Her name's Mercedes Corona. She's a coworker of mine. We're good friends. And so from like episodes 10 to 14, it's a lot of school-based polyvagal theory. So we apply the polyvagal to the school system. And now we're doing this thing where we're applying the polyvagal theory to therapy and what therapy should be like. And we're sharing bad therapy examples that we got from people on Instagram. So we lay out the basics of the polyvagal theory, and now we're more doing how to apply it to everyday life. And because it's not just like a theory that sits in and of itself, it really affects everything that we do, because it's like the theory of like how we connect as mammals and how we shift down to defensive states. So it's ever present, like in everything that we do in our lives. So now we're just talking about how to apply that. And I think therapy is a very big deal for people, for our audience at least. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of therapists who listen. There's a lot of people that are going to therapy or maybe done with therapy because of bad experiences. So that's kind of the focus of the podcast is how to explain polyvagal theory in very simple terms, and then how to apply it to daily living as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, polyvagal, just before we wrap up, polyvagal is what?
The vagus nerve is literally the nerve that connects the brain to the body. So we, in my field, we talk a lot about brain body, but no one really explains it very well until, in my opinion, Dr. Porges. And so he was able to explain the connection between our bodies and our thoughts and our experiences like this. He did just a fantastic job. So the vagus is the nerve that connects the brain to the body, and through the autonomic nervous system. So poly means more than one. So there's one vagal conduit, mm-hmm. but that connects to these different branches of the autonomic nervous system. So there's just multiple uses for it. So that's why it says poly.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Justin, where can people go and find out more about your podcast and the work that you do?
The Polyvagal podcast is available on all major listening platforms. JustinLMFT.com is my website, where I have a blog. I answer questions all the time. I love answering questions. Justin LMFT on Instagram is the best place to kind of get new quotes and content like videos. We do live streams there every Sunday night before we record our episodes, which is a lot of fun. Mercedes and I do a live stream. So yeah, JustinLMFT.com or JustinLMFT on Instagram are probably the best ways.
Excellent. Justin, thanks so much for being on the Recovery After Stroke podcast, mate. I really appreciate it.
You are very welcome. You're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Discover how to support your recovery after stroke. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com.